The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty depot in Kingman, Arizona, and Victoria Turner felt her heart hammering so hard she wondered if the other passengers could hear it through the fabric of her modest gray traveling dress. It was September 1883, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man she had never met, carrying nothing but 2 carpetbags, a worn Bible, and a fear so profound it made her hands tremble as she gathered her belongings. The heat hit her like a physical wall when she stepped down from the coach, the late afternoon sun turning the desert landscape into something shimmering and unreal. And for a moment, she stood frozen on the boardwalk, wondering if she had made the most foolish decision of her 22 years. The town stretched before her in a collection of weathered wooden buildings, their paint faded by the relentless sun, and she could see the saloon across the street with its swinging doors, a general store with barrels lined up on the porch, and further down what looked like a church with a simple white steeple. Dust devils danced in the street, and she could hear the distant lowing of cattle, the sound carrying across the flat desert that surrounded the town like an ocean of sand and scrub. She had known it would be different from Philadelphia, but the reality of it made her throat tight with homesickness and uncertainty. "Miss Turner." The voice was deep and careful, and she turned to see a man standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of years of hard work and a face weathered by sun and wind. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and his eyes were a startling gray that seemed to take in everything about her in one careful glance. He wore working clothes, denim trousers, and a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and his boots were scuffed and dusty. "I'm Samuel Preston. I reckon you're the lady I've been corresponding with." Victoria nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. The letters had been formal, almost businesslike, but his handwriting had been careful, and his words had been kind. He had been honest about his situation, a ranch hand who had saved enough to buy his own small spread outside of town, who needed a wife to help him build something lasting. She had been honest too, or as honest as she dared, telling him about losing her parents to fever and having no family left in Philadelphia, about needing a fresh start somewhere new. She had not told him about her failures, about the teaching position she had lost because her students seemed to learn nothing under her guidance, about the boarding house where she had worked and been let go for breaking too many dishes, about the seamstress shop where her stitching had been deemed inadequate. She had not told him that she was terrified she would fail at being a wife too, that everything she touched seemed to crumble despite her best efforts. "I am Victoria Turner," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "It is good to meet you, Mr. Preston." "Samuel, please," he said, and his smile was genuine if a bit uncertain, "or Sam if you prefer. Mr. Preston makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and working in a bank." He stepped forward and reached for her bags, his movements careful and respectful. "How was your journey?" "I know it is a long way from Philadelphia." "It was interesting," she said, which seemed safer than admitting it had been exhausting and frightening and full of moments when she had nearly gotten off at various stops and turned back. "I have never seen landscape like this before." "It is very different from Pennsylvania." "That it is," he agreed, and gestured toward a wagon waiting near the depot. "I have a room arranged for you at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. I thought you would want a few days to settle in before we talk about the wedding, give you time to get to know the town and make sure this is what you want." He paused, his gray eyes meeting hers with an honesty that surprised her. "I know this is a big step, Miss Turner. I do not want you to feel rushed or pressured. If you decide this is not right for you, I will make sure you have passage back east." The kindness in his words made her chest ache. She had expected many things, but not this gentle consideration, not this recognition that she might need an escape route. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is very thoughtful." He loaded her bags into the wagon and helped her up onto the seat, his hand steady under her elbow. The wagon springs creaked as he climbed up beside her, and then they were moving through the town, the horses' hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. Victoria tried to take in everything. The people on the boardwalks who turned to look at her with open curiosity, the buildings that spoke of a town still finding its footing, the distant mountains that rose purple and stark against the impossibly blue sky. "The ranch is about 5 miles outside of town," Samuel said, his voice breaking the silence. "It is not much yet, just a small house and a barn, about 200 acres of grazing land. I have maybe 40 head of cattle right now, and I am working to build the herd. It is hard work, and the profits are slim for now, but I believe in another few years it will be something solid." He glanced at her, and she could see the pride in his expression, mixed with something that looked like vulnerability. "I will not lie to you, Miss Turner. It is a hard life out here. The summers are brutal hot, the winters can be cold, and there is always work to be done. But it is honest work, and it is mine, and I want to build something that will last." "I understand hard work," Victoria said, though her heart sank a little at the idea of managing a household in such harsh conditions. "I am willing to do whatever is needed." Even as she said it, she felt the familiar fear rising in her throat. What if she could not cook well enough? What if she could not keep a house in the desert? What if she failed him the way she had failed at everything else? Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a neat 2-story building painted white with blue shutters, and the woman who greeted them at the door was plump and motherly with keen eyes that seemed to see right through Victoria's careful composure. "So you are the mail-order bride," she said without preamble, but her smile was warm. "Come in, dear, you must be exhausted. Sam, you can bring her bags up to the room at the end of the hall." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a window that looked out over the street. Samuel set her bags down carefully and turned to face her, his hat still in his hands. "I will let you rest," he said. "But if it is all right with you, I would like to call on you tomorrow afternoon. Maybe show you around town properly, introduce you to some folks." "That would be nice," Victoria said, and meant it. There was something solid about Samuel Preston, something steady that made her want to trust him even as her fear whispered that she would only disappoint him in the end. After he left, she sank down onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of what she had done. She was nearly 2,000 miles from everything she had known, about to marry a stranger and try to build a life in a place that felt as foreign as the moon. She unpacked her bags slowly, hanging up her few dresses and setting out her hairbrush and the daguerreotype of her parents that was her only remaining link to her old life. Her mother's face looked out at her from the image, young and hopeful, and Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. "I hope I can do this," she whispered to the silent room. "I hope I do not fail him." That night she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the town, the distant music from the saloon, the bark of a dog, the footsteps of someone walking past on the boardwalk below. The bed was harder than she was used to, and the desert air that came through the open window was strange, dry and somehow alive with the scent of sage and dust. She thought about Samuel Preston and his careful courtesy, his honest eyes and work-roughened hands. She thought about the ranch he was building and wondered if she would be strong enough to help him, or if her presence would only drag him down. Sleep came finally in the early hours of morning, and when she woke, the sun was already climbing high and hot. Mrs. Henderson brought her breakfast on a tray, eggs and biscuits and strong coffee, and sat with her while she ate. "Sam Preston is a good man," the older woman said without being asked. "Works harder than just about anyone I know, and he is honest as they come. He has been saving for years to buy that ranch, and he has a real vision for what he wants to build out there." "He seems very kind," Victoria ventured, wondering how much the woman knew about their arrangement. "He is that," Mrs. Henderson agreed, "but kind only goes so far in this country. You will need to be strong too, dear. This is not an easy place for women, especially not for those who come from back east. The heat, the isolation, the work, it can break you if you let it." Her eyes were sympathetic but honest. "I am not trying to scare you, just prepare you. If you are going to make a go of it with Sam, you will need to be partners in truth, not just in name." The words settled into Victoria's chest like stones. Partnership meant trust, and trust meant being honest about her limitations. But how could she tell Samuel the truth? How could she admit that she had failed at nearly everything she had tried? The teaching position where the children had run wild under her guidance, the boarding house where her clumsiness had cost her the job, the seamstress work where her stitching had been deemed inadequate. Even the small things, the bread that never rose properly, the garden she had tried to tend that had withered despite her efforts. What if he decided she was not worth the risk? Samuel arrived in the early afternoon, freshly shaved and wearing what were clearly his best clothes, though they were still simple working man's attire. He offered her his arm with an old-fashioned courtesy that touched her, and together they walked down the main street of Kingman. He introduced her to Mr. Peterson at the general store, a rail, thin man with spectacles who welcomed her warmly and told her to come by any time she needed supplies. They stopped at the church where Reverend Matthews and his wife greeted her with enthusiasm, clearly delighted at the prospect of a wedding. They passed the blacksmith shop, where a massive man named Tom was working at his forge, and the land office where Samuel tipped his hat to the clerk. "The town is still growing," Samuel explained as they walked. 10 years ago there was almost nothing here, just a stop on the road. But the railroad is coming closer and more people are settling in the territory. It has potential, I think." He paused near the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open desert. "I know it is not what you are used to, Miss Turner. It is rough and raw and sometimes unforgiving. But there is something about this place, something about building something from nothing that speaks to me." Victoria looked out at the expanse of desert, the distant mountains, the vast sky that seemed to go on forever. There was a wild beauty to it, something untamed and honest that was nothing like the ordered streets of Philadelphia. "I think I understand," she said slowly. "It is a place where you can start over, where the past does not matter as much as what you do now." He looked at her with surprise and something that might have been approval. "That is exactly it," he said. "Out here, what matters is your work and your word, not where you came from or who your family was. A person can build something real if they are willing to put in the effort." They walked back through town in companionable silence, and when they reached the boarding house, Samuel turned to face her. "Miss Turner, I know we have only just met in person, but I feel like I should be honest with you about something." He took a breath, his expression serious. "I am not a wealthy man, and I probably never will be. The ranch is my dream, but it is going to take years of hard work to make it profitable. There will be lean times and hard times, and I cannot promise you an easy life. What I can promise is that I will work as hard as I know how, and that I will treat you with respect and honesty. If you decide to marry me, I will do everything in my power to be a good husband to you." The sincerity in his words made her throat tight. She wanted to match his honesty, to tell him about her fears and failures, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said, "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Preston. Samuel, I want you to know that I will try my very best to be a good wife to you, to help you build your ranch and make a home there." Even as she said it, the fear whispered that her best might not be good enough. "That is all anyone can ask," he said gently. "We will figure it out together, Miss Turner. I do not expect you to be perfect, just willing to try." They agreed to marry the following Saturday, giving her a week to prepare and to grow more accustomed to the town. Samuel visited every day, sometimes taking her for walks around Kingman, other times just sitting on the porch of the boarding house and talking. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had come west from Missouri when he was 18, that he had worked as a ranch hand for nearly 8 years before saving enough to buy his own land. He talked about his plans for the ranch, his hope to eventually have a large enough herd to drive cattle to market, his dream of building a house with real glass windows and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. Victoria found herself drawn to his quiet determination, his steady confidence that if he just worked hard enough, he could make his dreams reality. It was so different from her own experience, where effort seemed to lead only to failure and disappointment. She wanted to believe in his vision, wanted to be part of building something lasting, but the fear never quite left her. At night, lying in the narrow bed at the boarding house, she rehearsed scenarios in her head. What if she burned his dinner? What if she could not keep the house clean? What if she could not help with the work on the ranch? What if he realized he had made a mistake in sending for her? Mrs. Henderson helped her prepare for the wedding, lending her a dress of pale blue cotton that had belonged to her daughter and helping her alter it to fit. "You are nervous," the older woman observed as she pinned the hem. "That is natural, dear. Every bride is nervous, but I have watched you and Sam together this week, and I think you might just make a good match. He needs someone with a gentle heart, and you need someone with a steady hand. You will balance each other if you let yourselves." The wedding took place on a Saturday morning in the small church, with Reverend Matthews officiating and Mrs. Henderson and her husband standing as witnesses. Victoria wore the borrowed blue dress with her mother's cameo pinned at her throat, and Samuel wore a new shirt that he had clearly purchased for the occasion. His hands were steady as he placed the simple gold band on her finger, and when he kissed her at the end of the ceremony, it was gentle and respectful, a promise more than a passion. After the ceremony, several townspeople gathered at the church for a simple reception, bringing food and offering congratulations. Victoria tried to smile and accept their good wishes, tried to ignore the way her stomach churned with anxiety. She was married now, bound to this man and this place, and there was no turning back. Samuel seemed to sense her nervousness because he stayed close to her side, his presence solid and reassuring. In the late afternoon, they loaded her bags into the wagon and began the journey to the ranch. The town fell away behind them, and they rode across open desert broken by scrub brush and occasional stands of mesquite. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the mountains in the distance turned purple and deep blue. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, and Victoria felt both awed and terrified by the vastness of it all. "There," Samuel said, pointing ahead. She could see a cluster of buildings, small against the immensity of the landscape. As they drew closer, she could make out a house, simple but well built, with a covered porch across the front. Behind it stood a barn and a corral where several horses stood watching their approach. The house was made of wood weathered gray by the sun, and there were real glass windows just as Samuel had mentioned dreaming of. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her bags to the porch. "It is not much," he said, and she could hear the vulnerability in his voice. "But it is sound. I built it myself over 2 summers, and everything is solid. There is a well that gives good water, and the barn has room for more animals as the herd grows. It is wonderful, Victoria said, and meant it. The house represented years of hard work and careful planning, and she could see the pride he took in it. But even as she admired it, the fear rose in her chest. This was what she had to maintain, what she had to help build and improve. What if she could not do it? The interior of the house was simple. One main room that served as kitchen and living area, with a fireplace on one wall and a table with chairs near the window. A door led to a bedroom, and another to what Samuel explained was a storage room. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, and everything was clean and orderly. "I have been doing my own cooking and cleaning," he said with a slight smile. "So I know the work that goes into it. I am not expecting miracles, Victoria, just a partner to share the load." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The sun was setting, and Samuel lit a lamp that cast warm light across the room. "I made stew yesterday," he said. "Let me heat it up for supper, and then I will show you where everything is stored." They ate at the small table, and Victoria was surprised to find the stew was good, hearty, and well seasoned. Samuel talked about the routine of the ranch, the morning and evening chores, the work that needed to be done to prepare for winter even though it was still months away. He was matter-of-fact about it, not trying to hide the difficulty but also not dwelling on it. After supper, he showed her the storage room where supplies were kept, the flour and cornmeal and dried beans, the preserves and dried meat, the simple larder of a working ranch. "The bedroom is yours," he said when the tour was complete. "I will sleep out here on the settee for now. I know this is all happening very fast, and I want you to feel comfortable." His gray eyes met hers with that same careful honesty. "We are married, Victoria, but we do not know each other yet. I figure we can take time with that, get to know each other proper before we rush into things." The relief that washed through her was so intense it almost made her dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered. "I appreciate that more than you know." That first night in the ranch house, lying in the narrow bed in the small bedroom, Victoria listened to the absolute silence of the desert. It was nothing like Philadelphia with its constant noise and movement, nothing like the boarding house with its creaking floors and other occupants. Here there was only the occasional call of a night bird, the distant yip of a coyote, and the wind moving through the scrub brush. She felt the weight of her new life settling over her like a blanket, both comforting and suffocating at once. She woke before dawn to the sound of Samuel moving quietly in the main room, and by the time she dressed and emerged, he had already been outside to tend to the horses. "Morning comes early on a ranch," he said with an apologetic smile. "I am usually up before the sun. But you do not have to keep the same schedule if you would rather sleep longer." "I want to help," Victoria said firmly. "That is why I am here." He showed her the morning routine, feeding the chickens she had not noticed the night before, gathering eggs, drawing water from the well. The physical work felt good after so many days of travel and waiting, and she threw herself into it with determination. She made breakfast, biscuits and eggs and coffee, and was relieved when Samuel ate without complaint even though the biscuits were a bit too hard. "I will ride out to check the herd this morning," he said after breakfast. "Will you be all right here on your own? There is mending if you want something to do, or you could start getting familiar with the house and supplies." "I will be fine," she assured him, though her stomach tightened at the thought of being alone in the vast emptiness of the desert. But she was determined to prove herself useful, to show him that sending for her had not been a mistake. After he rode away, she cleaned up from breakfast and then explored the house more thoroughly. She found his clothes, work shirts and trousers that needed mending, and set herself up at the table with needle and thread. The work was soothing, something she could do with her hands while her mind wandered. But even as she stitched, the old fears crept in. Her sewing had never been good enough at the seamstress shop. What if Samuel looked at her work and found it lacking? He returned in the late afternoon, dusty and tired, and found her preparing supper, salt pork and beans with cornbread. The meal was simple but filling, and Samuel ate with the appetite of a man who had done hard physical labor all day. "The herd looks good," he reported. "No signs of illness, and the grazing is decent for this time of year. I will need to ride out to the north pasture tomorrow, check the fencing there." "Can I come with you?" Victoria asked, surprising herself. "I would like to see the ranch, understand what you are working with." He looked pleased at the suggestion. "I would like that. It will be a long day in the saddle, though. Do you ride?" "Some," she admitted, "though not recently." The next morning she climbed onto one of the gentler horses, trying to remember the lessons from her childhood when her father had taught her to ride in the parks around Philadelphia. The saddle felt strange and the horse seemed enormous, but Samuel was patient, showing her how to hold the reins and sit properly. They rode out into the desert together, and gradually Victoria felt herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait. The ranch was larger than she had realized, the 200 acres stretching across rolling desert land, dotted with scrub, and the occasional hardy tree. Samuel pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a dry wash that would run with water during the rare rains, the scattered cattle with his brand on their flanks. He talked about his plans, where he wanted to build more fencing, where he thought would be good grazing once he had more animals, where a second well might be dug eventually. "I know it does not look like much," he said, as they paused on a rise that gave a view of the entire spread. "But I see what it could be. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this could be a real operation. Not huge, but solid, something we could build a life on." He glanced at her and she saw the vulnerability in his expression. "Does that seem foolish to you? Too much of a dream?" "No," Victoria said softly. "I think it is wonderful to have a vision, to know what you are working toward." She paused, then added with painful honesty, "I just hope I can help you achieve it and not hold you back." He turned in his saddle to look at her fully. "Why would you hold me back? You are willing to work, willing to learn. That is all anyone needs." The words should have been comforting, but they only intensified her fear. He did not know about her failures, did not know how her willingness and effort had never been enough in the past. She opened her mouth to tell him, to confess everything, but the words would not come. Instead, she just nodded and urged her horse forward, and after a moment he followed. The days began to settle into a routine. Samuel would rise before dawn to tend the animals and ride out to check the herd, while Victoria managed the house, cooking and cleaning and mending. She threw herself into the work with fierce determination, trying to prove that she was worth the risk he had taken on her. But despite her efforts, small failures began to accumulate. She burned a pot of beans because she was not used to cooking on a wood stove. She broke a dish while washing up. She tried to make bread and it came out dense and heavy, barely edible. Samuel never complained, never criticized, but Victoria saw him eating the burned food and struggling through the heavy bread, and shame burned in her chest. She tried harder, woke earlier, worked longer, but it seemed like the more she tried, the more things went wrong. One morning, she went to gather eggs and discovered that one of the chickens had gotten into the feed and scattered it everywhere, and she could not figure out how to fix the latch that was supposed to keep them out. Another day she tried to help Samuel with mending a fence and ended up hitting her thumb with the hammer so hard it bled. "You do not have to do everything perfectly," Samuel told her gently after the fence incident, wrapping her thumb in a clean cloth. "You are learning, Victoria. It takes time." But time was exactly what she feared she did not have. How long would his patience last? How many burned meals and broken dishes and failed attempts before he regretted sending for her? She lay awake at night, the fear a constant weight on her chest, and tried to think of ways to do better, to be better. 3 weeks after their wedding, she attempted to cook a special dinner, wanting to show Samuel that she was improving. She had been practicing bread making, and this time the loaves seemed to be rising properly. She made a roast with vegetables, carefully tending the fire to keep the heat even. But when Samuel came in from his work, tired and dusty and looking forward to a meal, Victoria pulled the roast from the oven to find it burned black on one side and raw on the other. The bread had risen too much and then collapsed in the oven. The vegetables were mush. She stared at the ruined meal, and something inside her broke. All the fear and shame and sense of failure that she had been holding back for weeks came crashing down on her at once. Tears began streaming down her face, and she could not seem to stop them. "I am so sorry," she choked out. "I tried so hard, I wanted it to be good, but I cannot seem to do anything right. I ruin everything I touch." Samuel crossed the room in 2 quick strides and put his hands on her shoulders, turning her to face him. "Hey now, it is all right. It is just dinner. We can have beans and cornbread, or I can ride into town and get something from the hotel restaurant." "It is not just dinner," Victoria cried, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "It is everything. I cannot cook properly, I cannot sew well enough. I break things and burn things and make a mess of everything I try to do. I lost 3 jobs back in Philadelphia because I was not good enough, because I kept failing. I thought maybe here, with a fresh start, I could be different, but I am not. I am going to fail you too, Samuel. I am going to ruin everything you have built, and I do not know how to stop it." She was sobbing now, all the fear and shame pouring out of her in great heaving gasps, and she could not look at him, could not bear to see the disappointment she knew must be in his eyes. But instead of pulling away, instead of confirming all her fears, Samuel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and holding her while she cried against his chest. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and fierce. "You are not going to fail me, and you are not ruining anything. Do you hear me, Victoria? You are learning, and learning means making mistakes. Every single person who has ever tried to do anything new has failed at it first. That does not make you a failure, it makes you human." "But I have failed at so many things," she whispered against his shirt. "What if I cannot learn? What if I am just not capable?" He pulled back enough to look down at her, his gray eyes serious and intent. "Then we will figure it out together. Victoria, when I asked you to marry me, I was not asking for a perfect housekeeper or a trained cook or someone who already knew everything about ranch life. I was asking for a partner, someone to share this life with, to work alongside. We will succeed or fail together always. Do you understand? Together, not you alone carrying all the weight and all the fear." The words pierced through her panic, and she found herself staring up at him, trying to process what he was saying. "But what if my failures drag you down? What if because of me the ranch does not succeed?" "Then we will figure out what went wrong and try again," he said simply. "Victoria, I have been ranching for 8 years and I have failed at plenty of things. Lost cattle to disease, built fences that fell down in the first windstorm, bought equipment that broke the first time I used it. Failure is part of the work. What matters is that you keep trying, keep learning, keep moving forward. And you do not have to do it alone. We are partners now, remember? Your struggles are my struggles, and my struggles are yours." She felt something shift in her chest, a tiny easing of the fear that had gripped her so tightly. We will succeed or fail together, she repeated, her voice small. Always, he confirmed, and bent to kiss her forehead with a tenderness that made her throat ache. Now, let us see what we can salvage from this dinner. And tomorrow, if you want, I will teach you some tricks for managing the fire in the stove. Mrs. Henderson probably has some too. There is no shame in asking for help, Victoria. They ended up eating cornbread with honey and some of the dried meat from the storage room, and it was fine. Not fancy, but nourishing. After supper, Samuel sat her down at the table and they talked, really talked, for the first time since their wedding. Victoria told him about losing her parents, about the job she had tried and failed at, about the growing conviction that she was simply not capable of succeeding at anything. He listened without interrupting, his expression serious and sympathetic. When she finished, he told her about his own struggles, about coming west with nothing and working for years as a hired hand, about the rancher who had cheated him out of 6 months of wages, about the first winter on his own land when he had nearly frozen to death in the half-built house because he had not prepared properly. I felt like a failure too, he admitted. Felt like maybe I was kidding myself, thinking I could make something of this land. But I kept going because the only real failure is giving up entirely. Everything else is just learning. I have been so afraid, Victoria whispered. Afraid that you would regret marrying me, that I would ruin your dreams. The only way you could ruin my dreams is if you left, Samuel said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Victoria, I did not just want a mail-order bride to cook and clean. I wanted someone to share this life with, someone to talk to at the end of a long day, someone to build a future with. You are that person. The rest, the cooking and cleaning and all of it, we will figure out as we go. That night, for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Victoria slept deeply and without the usual nightmares of failure. When she woke in the morning, Samuel was already up, and she could smell coffee brewing. She dressed quickly and joined him in the main room. I want to learn, she said without preamble. Really learn properly. Will you teach me about the stove, about managing the fire? His smile was bright and genuine. Of course. And this afternoon, if you want, we can ride into town and you can talk to Mrs. Henderson and some of the other women. They all learned to cope with this climate and this life, and I bet they would be happy to share their knowledge. The next few weeks brought a subtle but profound shift in their relationship. Samuel became not just her husband in name but her teacher and partner, patiently showing her how to manage the temperamental wood stove, how to judge when the fire was hot enough for baking, how to adjust cooking times for the dry desert air. Victoria rode into town with him and spent an afternoon with Mrs. Henderson and several other ranch wives, learning about desert cooking and cleaning, about preserving food and managing water, about all the small tricks and techniques that made life in this harsh environment more manageable. The other women were welcoming and sympathetic, sharing stories of their own early struggles and failures. I burned every meal for the first 2 months, one woman confessed with a laugh. My husband lost 10 pounds before I figured out how to manage the stove. But he never complained, just kept eating whatever I put in front of him. The key is not being afraid to make mistakes, Mrs. Henderson added, and not being too proud to ask for help. We all need each other out here. The desert does not care about pride, and neither should we. Victoria absorbed their advice and their stories, feeling the tight knot of fear in her chest slowly beginning to loosen. She was not the only one who had struggled, not the only one who had failed and had to learn. The difference was that these women had partners who supported them, who saw the failures as part of the learning process rather than proof of inadequacy. Back at the ranch, she began to approach her work with less fear and more curiosity. When a loaf of bread did not rise properly, instead of dissolving into tears, She examined what had gone wrong and tried again. When she burned a meal, she adjusted the fire and made note of the error for next time. Samuel praised her efforts and her growing competence, but more importantly, he normalized the failures, treating them as expected parts of the learning process rather than catastrophes. Slowly, gradually, Victoria felt herself beginning to believe that maybe she could do this, maybe she could build a life here. The work was still hard, the climate still harsh, but she was no longer facing it alone. Samuel rode out each morning to tend the herd, and she managed the house and the immediate area around it. They fell into an easy partnership, working side by side when tasks required two people, supporting each other when things went wrong, celebrating small victories together. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the desert, Samuel reached over and took her hand. "You have done well," he said quietly. "I know these first months have been hard, but you have stuck with it, kept learning. I am proud of you, Victoria." The praise made her throat tight, but in a good way this time. "I could not have done it without you," she said honestly. "Without your patience and support, you could have given up on me after those first few weeks when I was such a disaster." "You were not a disaster," he corrected gently. "You were learning. There is a difference." He paused, then added, "And I meant what I said before. We succeed or fail together always. That is not just words, Victoria. That is how I see our marriage, our partnership. Whatever comes, we face it together." The conviction in his voice made her turn to look at him, really look at him, in the fading light. Somewhere over the past 2 months, Samuel Preston had become more than just the stranger she had married. He had become her friend, her teacher, her partner in the truest sense. And looking at his weathered face, his steady gray eyes, his work-roughened hands still holding hers, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "I am glad I came," she said softly. "Glad I answered your letter. I was so terrified at first, so sure I would fail. But us, building this life together, it feels right." His smile was slow and gentle. "It does it not? I was not sure it would, to be honest. Mail-order marriages are a risk for both parties, but I think we might have gotten lucky with each other." That night, Victoria lay in the small bedroom and thought about luck and risk and partnership. She thought about how Samuel had seen her at her worst, her most panicked and fearful and failing, and had responded with patience and support rather than disappointment. She thought about how his steady presence had given her the courage to keep trying even when she wanted to give up. And she thought about the warm feeling in her chest when he smiled at her, when he praised her efforts, when he reached for her hand. It was more than gratitude, she realized. More than relief at finding a safe place. Somewhere in the midst of learning to cook on a wood stove and manage a desert household, somewhere between the failures and the small successes, she had started to fall in love with her husband. The realization should have been frightening, but instead it felt natural, inevitable. Samuel Preston was a good man, an honest man, a man who kept his promises and faced challenges with steady determination. He had promised to be her partner, to face success and failure together, and he had kept that promise even when it would have been easier to criticize or give up on her. How could she not love a man like that? The question was whether he felt the same way. They had married for practical reasons, both of them looking for a partner to build a life with rather than a romantic love match. But perhaps practical partnerships could grow into something more. Perhaps love could develop from shared work and mutual respect, and the steady accumulation of small moments of connection. The next morning, Victoria woke with new purpose. She wanted to be a true partner to Samuel, not just someone learning to manage a household, but someone contributing meaningfully to the work of the ranch. After breakfast, she asked him to teach her more about the cattle, about reading the signs of illness or distress, about what to look for when checking the herd. Samuel looked surprised but pleased. "Most ranch wives prefer to keep to the house," he said. "Are you sure you want to take on more work?" "I want to understand what you do," Victoria said firmly. "I want to be able to help, really help, not just cook and clean. We are partners, right? That means I should know about all aspects of the ranch, not just the domestic side." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth and appreciation that made her heart flutter. "All right then," he said. "Let us start with the basics." He spent the morning teaching her about cattle, how to identify different animals, how to spot signs of injury or illness, how to move through the herd without spooking them. It was fascinating work, requiring observation and patience, and a kind of instinct that she had never needed in her city life. Victoria found herself enjoying it, enjoying the challenge of learning something completely new, enjoying the way Samuel explained things with careful detail and obvious passion for his work. Over the following weeks, she began to ride out with him regularly, helping to check the herd and mend fences and all the other tasks that came with running a ranch. The physical work was hard, and she came back to the house each evening tired and sore. But it was a good kind of tired, the satisfaction of having accomplished something concrete. And working side by side with Samuel, she felt their partnership deepening, felt the connection between them growing stronger. One afternoon in mid-November, they were riding back from the north pasture when they spotted a calf that had wandered away from the herd and gotten itself tangled in some brush. Samuel dismounted immediately and went to free the animal, but it was frightened and struggled, making the situation worse. Victoria climbed down from her horse and approached carefully from the other side, speaking in a low, soothing voice. The calf stopped struggling at her approach, and between the two of them, they were able to free it and guide it back toward the herd. "You have a good way with animals," Samuel said as they rode back to the house. "That calf calmed right down when you talked to it." "I used to sing to the horses at the livery stable near my boarding house," Victoria admitted. "The stable master said they liked my voice." "Will you sing for me sometime?" Samuel asked, and there was something in his tone that made her pulse quicken. That evening, after supper, she sang while they sat on the porch, old hymns and folk songs she remembered from her childhood. Samuel listened in silence, and when she finished, he reached over and took her hand. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you." They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the darkness, and Victoria felt the warmth in her chest expanding. She wanted to tell him how she felt, wanted to say the words that kept trying to escape, but fear held her back. What if he did not feel the same way? What if he was content with their practical partnership and did not want the complication of romantic love? But Samuel seemed to be wrestling with his own thoughts. Finally, he said, "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy here?" "I know this is not the life you imagined for yourself, and it is hard work, harder than I think you expected. If you are not happy, if you want to go back east, I will understand." The question surprised her so much she turned to stare at him. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out fast and emphatic. "No, not at all. I just want to make sure you are here because you want to be, not because you feel obligated or trapped." "Samuel," she said slowly, gathering her courage, "I am here because I want to be. Not just because of the partnership or the ranch, though I value those things. I am here because of you, because you have been kind and patient, and you have helped me believe that I am capable of more than I thought. Because working with you and building this life with you makes me happy in a way I have never been before." She took a breath and said the words that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I am here because I love you. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then Samuel turned to face her fully, and even in the darkness she could see the emotion in his expression. "You love me." "Yes," she whispered. "I know we married for practical reasons, and I do not expect you to feel the same way, but I needed to be honest with you. I love you, Samuel Preston." He made a sound that was half laugh, half something deeper. "Victoria, I have been half in love with you since the first time you rode out to check the herd with me and asked 100 questions about the cattle. I have been completely in love with you since that night you cried over the burned roast, and I realized how much you were carrying, how hard you had been trying, how afraid you were of failing. I love your courage and your determination, and the way you sing to frightened calves. I love everything about you." Joy flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. "You love me. So much it terrifies me sometimes," he admitted. "I have been afraid to say anything, afraid you might feel pressured since we are already married. I did not want you to feel like you had to return my feelings out of obligation." She laughed, and it came out shaky with emotion. "We are a pair of fools, both of us in love and both too afraid to say so." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and sure. "No more fear," he said. "No more worrying about failure or obligation or any of it. Just us together, building this life and this love. We succeed or fail together, remember? Always," she whispered. And then he was kissing her, and it was nothing like the chaste kiss at their wedding. This was deep and passionate and full of all the emotion they had been holding back. Victoria wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the love and relief and joy that filled her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I think," Samuel said with a slight shake in his voice, "that we should probably move you out of the bedroom and me off the settee, if you are agreeable to that." She smiled up at him, feeling a blush heat her cheeks but meeting his eyes steadily. "I am very agreeable to that." They went inside together, and for the first time since their wedding, Victoria entered the bedroom with Samuel beside her. There was nervousness, of course, but it was overwhelmed by love and desire and the bone-deep certainty that this was right, that they were right together. Samuel was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable and cared for. And when they finally came together as husband and wife in truth, Victoria felt the last of her fears dissolve, replaced by a sense of rightness and belonging that she had never experienced before. Afterward, lying in Samuel's arms in the darkness, she felt tears slipping down her cheeks. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, concern in his voice. "I am more than all right," she assured him. "I am happy. I did not think I could be this happy, Samuel. I thought I was broken somehow, incapable of success or contentment. But you showed me that I was wrong, that I was just afraid and alone. With you, I am not afraid anymore. With you, I can do anything." He pulled her closer, his lips against her hair. "We can do anything," he corrected. "Together, Victoria. Always together." Winter came to the Arizona desert, not with snow but with cold nights and shortened days and a different kind of hardship. Samuel worked harder than ever, preparing for the lean months, and Victoria worked beside him, their partnership now strengthened by love and physical intimacy. They faced challenges together: a fence that needed extensive repairs, a cow that developed an illness and had to be carefully tended, a shortage of feed that meant Samuel had to ride into town more often than he would have liked. But through it all, they supported each other, celebrated small victories, and weathered setbacks as a team. Victoria's cooking continued to improve, and she took pride in being able to provide nourishing meals for her husband. She learned to preserve food for the winter months, to make soap and candles, to manage all the domestic tasks that had once seemed so overwhelming. But more than that, she became a true partner in the ranch operation, helping with the cattle and the endless maintenance that the property required. One cold evening in January, they sat by the fire after supper, Victoria mending one of Samuel's shirts while he worked on repairing a bridle. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "that come spring, we might be able to buy a few more head of cattle. The herd has been healthy, and we have done well with managing our resources. If we can expand by even 10 or 15 head, that will put us in a better position for next year." Victoria looked up from her mending, seeing the carefully controlled hope in his expression. "How much would that cost?" He named a figure, and she thought about the household accounts she had been carefully maintaining. "We could do it," she said slowly. "If we are very careful through the rest of winter and spring, we would need to cut back on some things, but it is possible." Samuel's smile was bright and genuine. "See, partners, you understand the financial side as well as the practical side now. Together we are building something real, Victoria." In February, Victoria realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just the stress and physical work, but when she missed a second month and began to feel nauseous in the mornings, she knew. She was carrying Samuel's child. The realization filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. What if she failed at motherhood the way she had initially failed at being a ranch wife? What if she could not care for a baby properly? But she remembered Samuel's words about succeeding and failing together, and she pushed the fear aside. That evening, after supper, she took his hand and led him to the settee. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart pounding. He looked at her with concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she assured him quickly. "At least, I hope not. Samuel, I am going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and joyful it transformed him. "A baby, truly, truly," she confirmed, and found herself smiling back despite her nervousness. "I think it will be born in the fall, October or November." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "This is wonderful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to be parents. We are going to have a family." Then he pulled back to look at her, concern replacing the joy. "How are you feeling? Are you well?" "Do you need anything?" "I am well," she assured him. "A bit nauseous in the mornings, but Mrs. Henderson said that is normal. She said to rest more and not do any heavy lifting." "Then that is what you will do," Samuel said firmly. "I can take over more of the work around the house, and you will focus on taking care of yourself and the baby." Victoria shook her head. "We will adjust as needed, but I am not an invalid, Samuel. I can still work, still help. We are partners, remember. I am not going to sit idle while you do everything." They negotiated a compromise, Victoria continuing with the lighter household tasks and occasional help with the herd when she felt well enough, while Samuel took on more of the physically demanding work. As her pregnancy progressed and her belly began to swell with their child, Victoria found herself marveling at the change in her life. A year ago she had been alone in Philadelphia, terrified and uncertain, convinced she was a failure at everything she attempted. Now she was living in the Arizona desert, helping to run a ranch, married to a man she loved deeply, and carrying his child. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Samuel bought the additional cattle he had been planning for, expanding the herd and increasing their workload. Victoria's garden, planted with advice from the other ranch wives, began to produce vegetables that supplemented their diet and gave her a sense of accomplishment. She preserved everything she could, putting up jars of pickles and tomatoes and beans for the coming winter. In May, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at the ranch. Samuel gave her a length of fabric he had ordered from the catalog, a beautiful deep blue that would make a dress for after the baby was born. She gave him a new hat that she had carefully saved for and purchased in town. But the real gift was the life they had built together, the love that had grown from a practical arrangement into something deep and abiding. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Victoria said as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "A year ago I was so afraid, so convinced I would fail. And I did fail at many things, Samuel. I still do sometimes. But it does not terrify me anymore because I know we will face it together." He put his arm around her carefully, mindful of her swollen belly. "You know what I have learned this year. Failure is not the opposite of success. Giving up is the opposite of success. And you have never given up, Victoria. Even when you were terrified, even when you thought you were failing, you kept trying. That is real strength." In July, the heat became oppressive, and Victoria found herself moving slowly, her pregnant body struggling with the desert temperatures. Samuel insisted she stay inside during the hottest part of the day, and he brought her cool water from the well and did his best to keep her comfortable. "Just a few more months," he said encouragingly. "By October the weather will be cooling down and you will be holding our baby." The baby became more active as summer wore on, and Victoria would often place Samuel's hand on her belly so he could feel the kicks and movements. His face would light up with wonder every time, and he would talk to the baby, telling it about the ranch and the life they were building. "You are going to love it here," he would say, his voice soft and full of love. "Your mother and I are making a good place for you, a home where you will be safe and loved." In late September, Victoria felt the first pains, and Samuel immediately rode to town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Henderson. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but Samuel stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her even when she was sure she could not continue. "You can do this," he told her firmly. "You are the strongest person I know, Victoria. Just a bit longer." Finally, in the early evening of September 28, 1884, their son was born, red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs. The doctor placed the baby in Victoria's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face, the searching eyes, the perfect miniature fingers, and felt a love so overwhelming it made everything else seem small by comparison. "He is beautiful," Samuel whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You did it, Victoria. You brought our son into the world." They named him Thomas Samuel Preston, Thomas after Victoria's father and Samuel for his own. Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and growing well, and Victoria threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she had brought to learning ranch life. There were struggles, of course, sleepless nights and moments of uncertainty, but she had learned to ask for help when she needed it and to trust in her ability to learn and grow. Samuel was a devoted father, taking time from his work to hold his son and sing to him, and simply marvel at the miracle of his existence. "I did not think I could love anything more than I love you," he told Victoria one night as they watched Thomas sleep. "But somehow my heart has just gotten bigger, made room for him too." "That is how love works," Victoria said softly. "It does not divide, it multiplies." The first year of Thomas's life was busy and challenging, but Victoria and Samuel navigated it together, supporting each other through the difficult moments and celebrating the milestones. Thomas's first smile, his first laugh, his first attempts to roll over and eventually crawl, each achievement was a source of joy for both of them. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. The expanded herd did well, and Samuel was able to sell some cattle at a good price, bringing in much-needed income. They used some of the money to make improvements to the house, adding another room for Thomas and making some repairs that had been needed for a while. Victoria's garden expanded, and she became known in town for her preserved vegetables and the bread she had finally mastered. By the time Thomas was walking, sturdy on his little legs and getting into everything, Victoria could hardly remember the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Kingman nearly 2 years earlier. She had learned not just to survive in the desert, but to thrive here. She had learned that failure was not a permanent condition, but a temporary setback. Most importantly, she had learned that with the right partner, with love and support and mutual respect, anything was possible. One evening in the spring of 1886, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas play with a toy horse Samuel had carved for him, Victoria leaned against her husband's shoulder and said, "You remember what you told me that night I had the breakdown over the burned roast? About succeeding or failing together." "I remember," Samuel said, his arm tightening around her. "You were right," she said simply. "That is the secret, is it not? Not trying to be perfect or never making mistakes, but having someone to face it all with, someone who believes in you even when you do not believe in yourself. You gave me that, Samuel. You gave me the courage to keep trying, to keep learning, to build a life I never thought I could have." "We gave that to each other," he corrected gently. "You think you were the only one who was afraid. I was terrified that I would not be a good enough husband, that the ranch would fail, that I could not provide for a family. But you believed in me, in my dreams, and you worked beside me to make them real. We built this together, Victoria. The ranch, our home, our family, all of it is because we faced everything together." Thomas toddled over to them, demanding attention, and Samuel scooped him up, settling him on his lap. The little boy grabbed at his father's hat, laughing when Samuel made exaggerated protests. Victoria watched them together and felt her heart swell with contentment. "I want more," she said suddenly, and Samuel looked at her with surprise. More children," she clarified. "I want Thomas to have siblings, to grow up with brothers and sisters. I want to fill this house with family, with love. Is that foolish?" His smile was tender. "Not foolish at all. I want that too. A whole house full of children, if we are blessed with them. A real family, building a real legacy here." Over the next several years, that dream became reality. In 1887, they welcomed a daughter, Emma Victoria Preston, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Thomas was a devoted big brother, protective and gentle with his baby sister. 2 years later, another son arrived, Charles Preston, with his father's dark coloring and his mother's smile. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. Samuel's careful management and hard work, combined with Victoria's skill at managing the household finances and the domestic side of the operation, allowed them to gradually increase their herd and improve their property. They built a larger barn, dug a second well, and even added a proper parlor to the house. Victoria became a respected member of the community, known for her kindness and practical wisdom. She helped new mail-order brides adjust to life in Kingman, sharing the lessons she had learned about managing a household in the desert and offering support to women who were struggling with the transition. She understood their fears because she had lived them, and she could speak to them with the authority of someone who had overcome those challenges. "The secret is partnership," she would tell them. "Not trying to be perfect, but being willing to learn and having a husband who sees you as a partner, not a servant. If you have that, you can build something wonderful, even in the hardest circumstances." Samuel became a leader in the local ranching community, respected for his knowledge and his integrity. When disputes arose between ranchers, he was often called upon to mediate. When a new rancher needed advice, Samuel was generous with his time and experience. He never forgot the struggles of his early years, and he was always willing to help those who were where he had once been. In 1892, when Thomas was 7, Emma was 5, and Charles was 3. Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only joy and anticipation. Their fourth child, a daughter named Sarah, was born in early 1893, completing their family. The house that had once seemed so small was now filled with noise and laughter, and the constant activity of 4 growing children. Victoria sometimes felt exhausted by the sheer amount of work involved in managing a household of 6, but she had help now. Thomas and Emma were old enough to take on small chores, and Samuel hired a young man from town to help with the ranch work, allowing him more time with his family. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Samuel took Victoria to the rise overlooking the ranch, the same spot where they had stood years earlier when he had shown her his vision for the future. The view was different now. The herd was much larger, easily 100 head of cattle grazing across improved pastures. The house had been expanded and improved, with real glass windows and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The barn was substantial and well-maintained, and there were several outbuildings that had not existed a decade earlier. "We did it," Samuel said, his arm around Victoria's waist. "Everything I dreamed of building, we built it together." Victoria leaned against him, looking at the tangible evidence of their decade of partnership. But more than the physical improvements to the ranch, she thought about the life they had built, the family they had created, the love that had grown from a practical arrangement into something profound and lasting. "You remember that night I told you I was afraid of failing you?" She asked softly. "I remember. I want you to know that you were right. We succeeded together. Not because everything went smoothly or because we never made mistakes, but because we faced everything as partners. You taught me that failure is not permanent, that mistakes are part of learning, that love and support can help someone become more than they ever thought they could be." He turned her to face him, his weathered face still as handsome to her as it had been the day they met. "You taught me something too. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, that vulnerability is not weakness, that the willingness to keep trying despite fear is real courage. You made me a better man, Victoria Preston. You made our life richer and fuller than I ever imagined it could be." They kissed there on the rise, with the ranch spread out below them and the desert stretching to the horizon. And Victoria felt the same sense of rightness she had felt that first time, the certainty that they belonged together, that they had found something rare and precious. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch and worked alongside his father, learning everything Samuel could teach him about cattle and land management. Emma was spirited and independent, constantly asking questions and pushing boundaries. Charles was quiet and thoughtful, with a love for books and learning that surprised his parents. Sarah was the baby, sweet and affectionate, doted on by her older siblings. In 1898, when drought threatened the region, Samuel and Victoria faced it together, making hard decisions about the herd and carefully managing their resources. They lost some cattle, and it was a lean year, but they made it through. In 1900, when a particularly harsh winter brought unusual cold to the desert, they worked together to protect the animals and keep their children safe and warm. Each challenge was faced as a team, each victory celebrated together. Victoria never completely lost her fear of failure, but she learned to manage it, to recognize it as a signal to ask for help rather than a prediction of disaster. Samuel continued to be her steady support, her partner in every sense, but he also leaned on her strength when he needed it, trusting her judgment and valuing her contributions. On their 20th anniversary in 1903, their children, now ranging from Thomas at 19 to Sarah at 10, organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors gathered to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. There were speeches and toasts, and Victoria found herself standing beside Samuel, holding his hand, marveling at how far they had come. 20 years ago, I stepped off a stagecoach in Kingman, terrified and certain I would fail, she said when it was her turn to speak. I married a stranger and came to a land I did not understand. I made countless mistakes, burned meals, broke dishes, and struggled with every aspect of this new life. But I had a partner who believed in me, who taught me that failure is not the end but a step on the path to success. Samuel Preston showed me that we do not have to face life's challenges alone, that with the right person beside us, we can overcome anything. We have succeeded together, always together, and I am grateful for every day of these 20 years. Samuel spoke next, his voice steady but full of emotion. When I sent that letter east looking for a wife, I thought I needed help managing a household. What I got was so much more. I got a partner, a friend, the love of my life, and the mother of my children. Victoria came to me afraid that she would fail, and instead she showed me what real courage looks like. She took every challenge this harsh land and this difficult life threw at her, and she kept trying, kept learning, kept growing. She made this ranch a home, made my dreams our dreams, and built a life far richer than anything I imagined. We have succeeded together, and I know that whatever comes in the years ahead, we will face it the same way. The celebration continued into the evening with music and dancing and laughter. Victoria danced with Samuel under the stars, the same stars that had watched over them for 20 years, and felt completely at peace. The frightened mail-order bride who had feared failure at every turn was gone, replaced by a strong, confident woman who knew her worth and her capabilities. But more than that, she was a woman who had learned the true meaning of partnership, who had discovered that success was not about perfection, but about persistence, not about never failing, but about always getting back up. She had learned that with the right person beside her, she could face anything, accomplish anything, build anything. As the years moved into the new century, the Preston Ranch continued to thrive. Thomas eventually took over much of the day-to-day operation, allowing Samuel to slow down a bit as he aged. Emma married a young rancher from a neighboring property and started her own family. Charles went east to study law but returned to Kingman to practice, becoming the town's first lawyer. Sarah became a teacher, fulfilling a dream that Victoria had once thought impossible for herself. Samuel and Victoria grew old together, watching their children build their own lives and welcoming grandchildren with joy and pride. The ranch became known as one of the most successful operations in the region, a testament to decades of hard work and careful management. But more than that, it stood as evidence of what two people could accomplish when they truly partnered together. In 1923, celebrating their 40th anniversary, Samuel and Victoria sat on the porch of the house that had been expanded and improved, but still retained the bones of the structure Samuel had built with his own hands. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with age and sun, but the love between them was as strong as ever. 40 years, Victoria marveled, looking at her husband. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and certain I would fail. You never failed, Samuel said, reaching for her hand with fingers that were now gnarled with arthritis but still strong. Not once in 40 years did you fail, Victoria. You succeeded at everything you set your mind to. Only because I was not facing it alone, she corrected. Only because you kept your promise, Samuel. We succeeded or failed together always. That was the secret, the key to everything we built, not my abilities or your skills, but our partnership. Together we were strong enough to face anything. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Together always. That is my promise still, Victoria. For however many years we have left, we face them together. Their children and grandchildren gathered around them, 3 generations of Prestons, all living lives built on the foundation that Samuel and Victoria had laid. Thomas ran the ranch with his own son learning beside him. Emma and her husband had a successful spread of their own. Charles had become a respected lawyer and community leader. Sarah taught in the Kingman school, inspiring young minds just as Victoria had once feared she could not do. As the sun set over the desert that evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple and gold, Victoria leaned against Samuel's shoulder and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From fear to courage, from failure to success, from strangers to lovers to partners in the truest sense. It had not been easy, and there had been moments of struggle and doubt, but they had faced it all together, always together. "I love you," she said softly, the words as true and meaningful as they had been the first time she had spoken them 40 years earlier. "I love you too," Samuel replied, his arm tightening around her. "My Victoria, my partner, my love. Thank you for taking that leap of faith, for stepping off that stagecoach despite your fear, for building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat like that as darkness fell, and the stars emerged, surrounded by family, wrapped in love, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and good. The mail-order bride who had been afraid of failing had instead succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, not because she never failed, but because she had a partner who taught her that failure was just a step on the path to success, that together they could overcome anything, that love and support could help someone become more than they ever thought they could be. And in the end, that was the greatest success of all, not the prosperous ranch or the raised family or the respect of the community, but the love they had built together, the partnership that had sustained them through 4 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. They had succeeded together, always together, just as Samuel had promised that first night when Victoria had been drowning in fear and shame. And that promise, kept faithfully for 40 years, had made all the difference. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 68, with Victoria holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, but without regret, knowing that they had made the most of every year they had been given. She lived another 6 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still active in the community and still sharing her story with young women who came to Kingman seeking new lives. Victoria Preston died in 1931 at the age of 70, in the house she and Samuel had built together, in the bed they had shared for over 4 decades. Her last words were, "I am coming, Samuel. We will be together again." And those who knew their story had no doubt that she was right, that somewhere beyond this life, 2 souls who had been true partners on earth were reunited in eternal love. The Preston Ranch continued to operate for generations, passed down through the family, a living testament to what 2 people had built with hard work, determination, and unwavering partnership. And the story of Samuel and Victoria became part of local lore, told to young couples starting their own journeys, a reminder that success is not about perfection but about persistence, not about never falling but about always rising together, not about facing challenges alone but about finding a partner who will stand beside you and say, "We succeed or fail together always."